Been watching ball with my big old brain and think the tape needs some explaining. Studying the stats to understand it. Hey, yo.
Talk data to me. Talk data to me.
What is up, y'all? Welcome to episode 16 of Talk Data to Me. I am your host, Dwain McFarland. I've got a great guest for you guys today. It is none other than Mr. Jeff Mueller, Doctor of Physical Therapy, Jeff Mueller. He is here to talk with us about his process, the way he works through injuries. We're going to talk about some players at the end, guys, but the idea here is also teaching you guys how to, really teaching you how to fish, not just giving you the fish, helping you think through what some of these types of injuries mean, what it means with different teams, different positions, all those sort of things. Jeff does a lot of really great work. If you're not following him on Twitter, you should be at JMThrive, THRIVE. PT as in physical therapy. You can also find his work at Destination Devi, DLF, and 4for4, among other places. Welcome into the show, Doctor. Can I just call you Dr. Jeff? Is that right?
Yeah, you can just call me Jeff. That's Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure interacting over the years, so it's awesome to do a show with you.
Yeah, it's always a fun part of what we all do. I feel like I already know you, to be honest, because we've DM'd back and forth multiple times on Twitter. You've been nice enough to send me like some of your spreadsheets and things where I have like a tracker that I can look at for injuries and keep up with those things, especially in the preseason when there's just so much going on. So you've always been very kind, with your time and access to your materials, and then just, interacting on Twitter, period. And you've done a really nice job of not only just handling the injury news, but one, you're a big 49ers guy. A lot of people love to hear your 49ers advice, but just overall fantasy advice. Like, man, you've really you've grown and just kind of, you do the injury stuff, but like you're hardcore, man. You're into fantasy, period.
I think we call that an addiction.
Yes. That's what my wife would call it. It's an addiction that turned into a job.
Yep.
Pretty
much. Yeah.
All right, cool. So we're going to hop in, guys. And I always like to throw just kind of a hook question, a zinger, if you will, Jeff, right out of the gate. And so for you, it is this: what is the non-season ending injury that worries you the most for skill position players, and why? You see this one pop up and you're like, oh man, this could be like a rodeo. I don't know which way it's going to go. It's hard to predict, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you know what's funny? You will probably honestly agree with this, but it seems like over the years it actually changes year to year. This year it seems like PCL sprains kind of takes the cake on that one. Where it's like, man, this guy has a PCL sprain. In the past it seems like maybe they miss a game or two, but now we have no idea how long these guys are going to miss, how these guys are going to produce once they come back. You think Ricky Pearsall, you think Brock Bowers, you think Drake London's missing time. Dalton Kincaid right now, he's dealing with a third issue with his PCL injury right before playoffs. So yeah, those are tricky, and it causes a lot of issues within the knee that, these guys have to be able to run routes. They have to be able to change direction quickly, and it really messes with their mechanics. So that's probably the answer for this year. Next year, it might be different.
Yeah, and I'm sure like there's just a lot of these injuries. Like there's just so much variability because like different players respond differently. You don't always have all the information about how bad the injury is. You're trying to piece together what you can find as well as watching the video. So it's one of these things that while like your degree is a science related degree, like actually doing this part of your job, would you say it can at times be more of an art?
Yeah. And yeah, honestly. And that's actually funny that you say that, because technically our kinesiology initially fell under art in schools. So
my degree's in kinesiology as well, just so you know.
Is it really?
Yep.
I didn't know that.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is my degree. My degree was in
That's
coaching, and I never coached. So how about that?
Well, you coach us through utilization. There you go.
Still got back around to football.
Yeah.
Well, look, I mean, and in your answer there, like honestly, like kind of leads straight in to the first question, because there's just so much like nuance to this work that you guys do. And I want to say this, like, I really appreciate the work that you do, as well as some of the other folks in the industry that do this stuff, because as someone that is, working on projections and constantly looking at rankings, one of the most difficult aspects of the job, in my opinion, is trying to really understand what the injuries are going to do and what it's going to mean for the player projections for the week, for the next 4 weeks, for the rest of the season. Those are all things that I'm working on. But having you guys, especially you, I can go check out and see what you're saying and look at your material. And then I try to use that, to inform, essentially what I'm doing. But what I like about where the industry is headed with injury, analysis is that, number one, we have actual professionals that know about these things, that work with players like yourself, really trying to bring these things to light. And then number two, you root a lot of this stuff in data. Now you give some warnings about data and return timelines and things
Yeah.
like that, and we can get into those things, but still I know that what you're doing is rooted in, okay, you've actually dealt with this type of injury. You've dealt with this type of injury for athletes, maybe not an NFL player, but you also have read all the research on it. So when you're evaluating, the potential impact of an injury, what is your process? When you think about return to play, you think about injury, re-injury risk, you think about, performance when they return. That's the hardest one for me. It's okay, great, they're back, but are they 100%? Are they 80%? What should I expect?
Yeah, I think, like you said, there's a lot of nuance to this. There's so many different variables that you have to incorporate, and that's a big reason. You mentioned that, I've said some comments about, well, I don't necessarily love data, or there's a lot of problems with data involved with injury specific issues. Um, and there really are, because you're taking all these big samples and grouping it into one, and every single injury is very individual. It's very, single case by single case. No injury is alike. And you see that with, some of the reporting that we get. The talk this year seems to be, man, injury reporting is just terrible. Well, if you really look into the NFL guidelines, they're very broad on what these teams actually have to report. So you often hear some of the injury news from players, where think of J.K. Dobbins, where he was reported as a clean ACL. When I look into that in the offseason for the next year, I'm thinking, okay, clean ACL, it should take this long. And then we find out 6 months later, after we've gone through all of that for drafts and values and everything, oh, he actually blew out his entire knee.
Yeah.
He had a hamstring tear with it,
And
and
the
there's
Drake
some of those
London thing right
variables that,
now. It's
yeah,
production has dropped over the last month, and we find out, oh, he's been dealing with a stress fracture in his foot.
Roma Dunze.
Yeah, Romo Dunze. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, just like that, where it's and you hear some of that info, and it's okay, that actually helps explain, I'm sure on your end, you're looking at utilization, and it's his utilization is strong, but his production isn't. What's
Yep.
going wrong here? It's not necessarily quarterback chemistry, but, oh, okay, he's been playing with I don't know why they were letting him play through a stress fracture, because that could have been significantly worse, and then he's not even there for the team for playoffs.
Right.
So in a case like that, it's good that he's actually resting now, but that's a perfect example where I have a tough job, and that would be the one thing, as people are talking to some of these injury analysts, you've seen the comments. The comments can get pretty brutal. We only work with so much information,
Right. Yeah.
Um, and it's oh, the hit rate of this injury analyst is terrible. It's hey, look, we're basing off of video. So getting back to part of my process, I try to get as many angles of the video of the injury as possible. NFL Pro has been a great resource. I try to get as much intel from coaches and the teams, whatever they're releasing, because I think what people need to understand too is this is medical information. Technically, we shouldn't have any of that information, but because the NFL does have some guidelines, we do get some. But that's where Coach Speak Index has come in handy. He dives into, what do the coaches say? How accurate have they been in the past, especially with injuries? John Paulson, I use a list that he created for beat writers, just for, I sift through that throughout my workday and between patients, any intel that I can gather, or any videos of players practicing, how they're moving. Are they in non-contact jerseys? Are they not? But all of that, you try to put all of that together, and you're still only working with probably 50-60% of the information. So it's hard. It's hard to get a really good, accurate prediction for the following week.
Right. So of those, talk a little bit about re-injury risk. How do you account for that when you start thinking about what a player could look like when they come back? They may be 80%, but there's also this risk, because I'm always thinking about that with the projections. On a lot of times on players like that, I will actually deduct a little bit extra and just have them
Mhm.
projected to the under, just because
Yeah.
I'm also worried like they could get knocked out of the game, and it's just this additional risk. But honestly, I could be wrong in that. It's honestly just something that I've kind of gotten a feel for over the last 3 to 4 years as I've done projections. But interested in your thoughts on that.
No, I honestly I like that idea because I think you do have to consider, and that's part of what I go through, like with the injury pod that I do, actually on Saturdays. I try to sift through, and your model has been great. I try to sift through like what is this person's ceiling when fully healthy, but what's the floor, and is that what's the risk level there of if they do suffer a re-injury or if they're limited in their movement because maybe they make it through the whole game, but
Right.
if they're playing through a high ankle sprain, they're not going to be moving as efficiently. So, like a wide receiver, they're not going to be generating as much separation. They may not earn as many targets that week, or maybe they're a decoy, like we've seen with like T. Higgins in the past. I think that is a fantastic idea on your end to incorporate some of that risk, just to give the viewers, because they're looking at your model, trying to decide, should I play this guy or this guy, and what's the
Right.
risk there. And re-injury risk, I would say that is where the data comes in handy. The data should be viewed as I've seen some injury analysts talk about data, injury data specifically, and be like that is the gold standard. It's you can't use that as the gold standard because there's so many issues with it, but it's a great tool to use, just to see. Like I use it for how many of these players have missed a certain amount of time, and the average is say 3 weeks. This guy is coming back at 2 weeks. And what's the re-injury percentage on those players, and
Yeah.
the data gives me a good picture for that.
And
Hopefully that
I
makes
think
sense.
people like the brevity, right, of the data. Hey, it's a grade 2 whatever hamstring. Historically, this is a 2 to 3 week recovery, and then you see 85% upon return. Like people just they see those little pieces of information, and it's easy to digest. But you talked about some of the issues with it. Like elaborate a little bit more, like on that and why that's. It's not that you don't look at that data. It's not that you're not using it for it. But I have seen you actually speak out, on social media, saying, "Guys, like we just need to be careful with this sort of information because here are some of the things going on with it."
Right. So say you're looking at that data. Someone makes a post with all that data, 85% re-injury risk, et cetera. So you see that number, it's like that's a great number. That's good info to have. When you actually, if you were to open up that data set, just say it's a sample size of 70 guys, right?
Hmm.
So you're talking about reported grade 2 strains, and oftentimes that data set doesn't incorporate that the specific grade. So you're grouping in a bunch of guys who maybe they actually had a grade 1, maybe they had a little more severity, maybe they had other issues that weren't even reported. And again, some of that info we'll never have. But you're also dealing with, I think it's really really important to look at utilization and where the players sit in the depth chart. Like you can't group in, to me, like an Amon-Ra St. Brown. You can't group in somebody like that who typically does play well through injury. You have to look at it in an individual case, and has very strong utilization when healthy. With say,
T.
on
Higgins.
footer, yeah, T Higgins, or like Devonta Parker. Devonta Parker would have been in that sample size, right? And historically, like in the past, he didn't have strong utilization, and so he's going to bring the data way down. Where so and so has this kind of injury, they typically come up with a 20% production dip. Well, that may not be the case for players Amon-Ra St. Brown's level. Maybe it's a 5% dip.
Yeah.
So
And I guess the other thing is like 70, a sample of 70 is just not very large. Like when I hear those kind of
it's not,
numbers, it's
yeah,
kind of like when someone's like, oh man, this guy kills man coverage. And then I go look it up and I see he's ran 70 routes against man coverage. I'm like, we know nothing really about this
yeah.
player, unless there's like a multi-year trend going on, with them. So, that is very interesting. So how much do you lean into? Because also like when you do lean too far into like these individual exception cases, that can also lead you astray at times. And maybe it depends on the type of injury they're dealing with as to how much you may lean more into like the overall data sets versus like what you think about just a player. Is that a factor, like the type of injury?
Yeah, it can lead me astray too in terms of like I think of Brandon Ayuk. I was very wrong on him this year. Granted, there's other variables involved with that,
Yeah.
but looking at Yeah, and I know Adam Hutchinson and myself were kind of bouncing off of each other. We aligned this offseason, looking at his typical prototype, winning against man coverage, generating separation, utilization within the scheme as well. And he kind of fit, Brandon Ayuk, Keenan Allen, Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs. They all fit a specific stereotype where on paper this person should be able to produce well in year one coming off ACL, where typically the data shows they don't produce well coming off ACL. So that, I mean, something like that, it's like, it's good info to have if it was a clean ACL, but it wasn't. It wound up being
Yeah.
ACL,
So,
MCL,
so
PCL.
what are some of the examples of the things that got you there on Ayuk? I mean, I think it's fine that you end up, it didn't end up hitting this year, but I think it's cool that people can understand, like, here are some of the other things you're looking at. And like with Ayuk, like it gives them an illustration, of like concrete examples, like of the things you're looking at.
Looking at for like good
Yeah.
usage or
For
get
like why you thought Ayuk would actually be able to come back, right? Versus maybe others had not.
Yeah, so some of the info is really good actually from so like your guys' model, fantasy points data, looking at like first down per routes run, yards per route run, targets per route run. Typically, if they're producing well, they're generating separation against man coverage, stuff like that. It's like I try to incorporate that. I don't have the knowledge that you have as an analyst in those areas, but I try to group it in with the injury info. Because I've just been led astray myself, and I think I've tried to tie that in with my viewers as well, where you look at some of this injury data and it can lead you astray if you get too focused on the injury itself and not how the player is used within the team. I think like Melvin Gordon a couple years back, he was viewed as by everyone. He was viewed as a void, and he wound up producing pretty well. I think he scored as a running back one that year. I don't even remember what year that was, but I try to use the utilization that has made my content significantly more accurate since I started doing that versus when I
Well,
didn't.
thanks, man.
Yeah. No, honestly, it's
Appreciate you
great
using
content.
it.
Yeah.
Well, no, I appreciate it. No, like, and again, like it's like we all come together to like try to contribute our part, right?
Yeah.
And that's the
They're all
cool thing about the
tools.
fantasy space now is that you've got someone like Jeff here, like helping on the injury side. We've got the utilization report. We've got all these different things, and like piecing it all together, like is still the trick. But the cool thing is we just have so much more information at our disposal versus like where we were 10 years ago. Like, it's just like, we just have so much more available to us. So one thing I wanted to ask you, because this is one that, as I'm, not to make the show all about me, but I do think a lot about the projection process. And one of the things that I'm thinking through typically, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but is when we have a player that's trying to return quickly from an injury, like they got injured last week, maybe we're really not expecting them to play. Amon-Ra St. Brown's an example of this, this week. Like, while I got him back into the rankings and into the projections, I put him at like wide receiver, I think 12. It like the projection on it ended up working out really well. But I definitely put more of a cap on his ceiling, even though I know he's played well through injuries in the past. But I find those to be the hardest. When a player suddenly surprises me and it's like, oh no, they're going to play this week when I didn't expect it, or it's a type of injury that typically would take them longer to return from, versus someone that's been out 5 or 6 weeks. Like, typically players like that, when they're coming back, I'm assuming they're healthy because the coaching staff's already waited that long. They've already done the IR thing. There's some conditioning and things like that come into it. How do you handle those sort of things? Do you find one of those things to be more tricky than the other?
Yeah, because again, tying back what we talked about prior of just some of the reporting we don't actually get. So you're kind of guessing to a degree of, I'm trusting the staff that this truly is a mild sprain. But even just from the knowledge of how tissue heals, I kind of know, like George Kittle, he's been playing, he's been performing well. His hamstring's still not healthy technically. If you were to really go through a bunch of scans on him, I guarantee his hamstring's not healthy, but he's playing and he hasn't left a game re-injured at all. So it's stuff like
He's
that.
gotten better as he's gone along, but that's
He
an
has,
interesting
yeah,
one because he was also out a long time, and they actually took
right,
an extra week past whenever they needed to after activating the 21-day practice window on him.
yeah. And then you look at a guy like Emeka Egbuka, he was supposed to miss time with the hamstring strain. I don't think he even missed a game.
Yeah, he didn't.
Um, and we've
And he
seen
hasn't
his
been the same
production drop.
since. We don't know
Exactly.
that it's necessarily 100% tied to that, but it could definitely be a factor.
Yeah, yeah, because Baker's injured as well.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the other thing too. Is like I connected with a guy who actually has spent some time. He works with a high end doc down in L.A. And he was name dropping a little bit, and he dropped some names. I'm like, wait, okay, so they're not even on the injury report. It's like, oh no, well, we checked this, and this, so they're dealing with some stuff. We don't hear about some of these injuries that like one guy was listed with a groin strain. He actually got checked for his knee as well. We'll never hear about that. That was privy information. So I would say it's hard. It's harder for me to go through the injuries like you. I align with you in that is the guys who are coming back very quickly because I know the tissue isn't fully healed and there's a little more risk of re-injury because that
Yeah.
tissue there's scarring, there's inflammatory reactions going on. There's risk that they make it worse, that they leave the game early, that they don't play as many snaps, they're not used the same versus a guy that unless it's a severe injury, that's different. But versus a guy who's missed 5-6 weeks, I'm like, well, especially if it's a team like LA. They utilize GPS, they utilize biometrics, they utilize certain systems that make sure these players are healthier once they're actually back, and they kind of prolong the wait. Um, I think the early returns are much more difficult to project.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so okay. It's good to hear you say that because I typically do dock those players a
Yeah,
little bit more than what I do. A lot of times, honestly, when players are coming back from a long time off, like depending on the news we're hearing, I won't dock them anything. Like I'll just
yeah,
put them right back into their full time role. Of course, like you said, people like Kittle, these hamstrings, these high. Talk about high ankle sprains just real quick. Like that's another one that I know. Man, historically, I've seen it happens to a player, and even though they get back honestly, they don't seem to be the same the rest of the year. Now that probably comes down to how severe of a high ankle sprain they had and the player, everybody's a little bit different, but that's one that definitely raises red flags for me.
yeah. And it's an injury to tissue that doesn't necessarily heal well. It doesn't have a big blood supply. The syndesmotic tissue between the two bones, that part gets sprained. It's getting pulled apart. Um, And so it's not like a quad strain or hamstring strain where it's going to heal fast. It has a large blood supply. And so I would say it affects players differently based on how they play. So like someone like just randomly thinking David Montgomery, if David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs both suffered high ankle sprains, I'd be a
Hmm.
little more concerned on Jahmyr Gibbs because his play style utilizes more elusiveness, more cutting, more lateral movement versus David Montgomery. He's more north south. He doesn't have to cut as much. Obviously, he still has to do that as he's trying to
Right.
evade tackles and all that. But overall movement throughout the whole game, it that's why it impacts players differently. And then, like you said, grades, it's impossible to know true grade unless you're actually looking at the scans itself and evaluating them in person.
Yeah, I know. And there's another thing I know that can sometimes happen with this. And like the first place I ever heard this was really hat tip back to the old Audible podcast from Football Guys with Gene Bramall. But he would talk about compensatory injuries, right?
Yep.
A player has one injury which they're kind of compensating for, right, on the field, and then boom, you can suffer another injury due to trying to overcompensate. Is that something that you've seen bear out in the data? Or just as you're doing your work from week to week.
Yeah, it's really hard to sift through that in data because it's certain injuries happen and you kind of have to assess. We don't really know, well, did it happen because this prior injury, but like certain
Right.
examples like Dalton Kincaid right now, he was dealing with a hamstring strain on his right side. Well, throughout his rehab, now he's dealing with an aggravation of his left PCL that he injured back in 2024 and then re-injured in July. So it's something happened there where, I mean, that's a compensatory issue. He's whatever injury a player is dealing with, it's going to alter how they move, and how you move depends on how your tissue's activating for you. So it can definitely play a role. I've seen some people say like, "Oh, compensatory injuries don't exist." If
Yeah.
you believe that, you don't understand biomechanics. Everything has to function the right way. So yeah, that's definitely a role.
Biomechanics, man, that was a lot harder class than I thought I was going to be in college. I remember when I signed up for that class, I was like, oh man. And I got in there. I was like, this is actually kind of, okay. Well, I'm going to have to study a little bit here. You know, and so there's compensatory injuries, but we also have, like, depending on the injury the player's had when they're returning, like the conditioning, could be a factor, especially if they had that lower body injury. And then that may not only, like, hurt performance in that first game back or potential utilization because the coaching staff knows they can't load them up, but also if you're tired, if you're not in shape, like that could lead. There's so many ways, there's so many paths to injuries, and football is just a brutal sport. So,
Yeah.
do you have any thoughts about certain injuries as players are trying to return that you may dock them more for? They might not quite be in shape yet, even though they've had whatever 3 or 4 games off because it's X type of injury.
Yeah, I think I go back to just thinking how these players move, how we run, how we sprint, cut, etc. Anytime the heel's hitting the ground, that kind of movement, how it goes up the chain, that for me plays a role in some of these compensatory injuries. So I think like turf toe, I think heel injuries, I think like one that would be hard to prove is like Marvin Harrison Jr., did this heel injury occur because he's not fully conditioned back from the appendectomy, and he's tired, so he's heel striking more, and it led to the heel
Mm,
bruise. It's like it'd be so hard to prove that, but in theory, it would make sense if that's what happened, and that's what led to the heel injury. But stuff like that, I think lower chain and up, I mean that plays a huge role. Hip injuries, that's a big one. I don't like hip injuries at all. I like that Brenton Strange has been performing well, but hip injuries can really impact how you're rotating, moving, lateral movement. I don't like those typically, especially for wide receivers.
if there is an injury that you think is like the most difficult to, like, come back and be in shape from, because of maybe cardio or whatever, is it just general, it's like soft tissue, lower body things, or is it, is there a specific injury that worries you the most?
Yeah, I laugh because I thought Debo Samuel pneumonia. That's that's a
Oh
big one.
yeah. Oh yeah.
That doesn't count though. Um, yeah, I would say probably honestly soft tissue because well, it again everything. There's so many variables involved. It just kind of depends. But I would say soft tissue, and depending on grade, like grade 2, grade 3, because that player, anything that has led the player to be out an extended period of time where they're not actually able to train, they're losing that conditioning throughout that time. So actually, I think Trey Benson's a perfect example. We don't 100% know what's going on with him right now, but
Mm-mm.
we know he had surgery on his knee, likely meniscus, meniscectomy. The timeline doesn't fit a repair. Some people were asking me about that. But they're scraping part of the joint line, and so it impacts his load bearing ability. So like running, any impact. So he missed who knows how much time where he wasn't able to sprint, run,
Right.
stay in shape. So he's losing that conditioning. And anytime I tell my patients the same thing, any amount of time that you've missed, it takes just as long to get that back.
Mm.
So stuff like that plays a big role in conditioning. And like you said, if they're not coming back fully conditioned, they're going to fatigue throughout the game, especially if they're thrown in with their normal utilization. And that means they're not going to move like they normally should. And that loads tissue differently, and that can lead to injury.
Yeah. Yeah. So, are there, you kind of hit on this a little bit earlier, like you talked about two stylistic players with David Montgomery versus Jahmyr Gibbs. But what about positions? Are there certain positions where you worry more or less about certain injuries? I know one I think about a lot here is like, okay, a quarterback, like that's not a scrambling quarterback, can play with a high ankle sprain, right? And they can still play, Now some play better than others. They can deal with some of these lower body injuries versus a running back or a receiver. Quarterback can play with a hamstring. Running back, not a good idea probably to be trying to play with, play through a hamstring injury, especially if you got that breakaway ability and you're used to opening it up. But are there certain positions and certain injuries where you actually just worry a little bit less or more, depending on the position they play?
Yeah, I think that actually ties in with a good convo that has been going on for years. Is like what our mobile quarterbacks. Sorry, our mobile quarterbacks more at risk than pocket passers. And I think something like that, like a quarterback dealing with a high ankle sprain or hamstring strain, they'll be able to play still, but it does limit their pocket mobility. And then as the pocket collapses, if someone's rolling up on them, it's just the same risk as if they're running and get tackled, something like that. What really stood out to me are X receivers, especially receivers who are utilized downfield, coming off soft tissue injuries. So you think like, I know I've harped on this over the years, pretty much every year. It seems like Nico Collins, T. Higgins, Mike Evans, Julio Jones in the past. Some of these long striders that they're running certain routes where they have to have healthy hamstrings as they get into a long stride, as they accelerate, as they decelerate. All of that's super important, and it does increase their risk a little bit because of their role and because of the routes that they run.
Yeah, because they really have to open it up. Like they
Yeah,
have to fully open it up to try to get open on a lot of these plays. That's a really interesting one. Any other positions like that where
yeah. I mean, big one, obviously. It seems too obvious, but it has to be talked about: running backs and high ankle sprains, just because of how much they have to read their blocking and depending on the scheme. Obviously, a little easier if it's north south, but they still have to cut, especially if they're evading attack. Some of the movements that are hard to predict are the reactionary movements as a defender's coming in on them. They're going to naturally try to avoid it and move. So to a degree there, but yeah, high ankle sprains really limit um, running backs. Hip injuries. We don't love hip injuries for wide receivers. They knock people out. I'm really curious to see how Parker Washington plays.
yeah.
And that's the part that, hip flexor is a little different versus like internal derangement in the joint itself. Those we really don't like Kenny Galladay. Um, who
Uh,
knows if Kenny Galladay was good before Matt Stafford, but it did impact him afterwards. Um, Stuff like that. Back injuries, especially for tight ends. So Sam Laporta is a really interesting conversation. I have no idea how he's going to return. We honestly can't say with certainty that he will return as himself next year.
wow.
That's concerning, especially for
Wow.
dynasty.
Yeah,
So
I've got him on a dynasty team.
yeah,
So
yeah, and it's like he could or he couldn't. But you think of the role of a tight end too. It's not just running routes; it's blocking. There, George
yeah.
Kittle talks about his position all the time. It's like getting into multiple car accidents. So now you've got a guy who's very physical, utilized a lot in run blocking, runs a bunch of routes, gets tackled a bunch, and now he's coming off a back injury. It's just risky.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think, another cool thing though that's, occurring now, like in sports, and it's just the natural evolution of medicine, right? Across all aspects of medicine. But we're seeing this show up like in returns, to play timelines. We're seeing it return and like how good players are when they do return from injuries. I remember back in the day when I first started playing fantasy football and an ACL injury was the absolute like kiss of death, man. I remember when it happened to Terrell Davis. And it was just like, oh my gosh, like he's never going to be the same. And he never was the same again. But then, like, not very long after that, the same thing happens. Not that many years. Adrian Peterson happens to him, and he comes back and he's an amazing. And now, and that was a surprise, right? That was like a medical marvel. Now we pretty much expect players to come back from ACLs, from MCLs, from all these different injuries. Obviously, it can still impact them. Sometimes it may take more than a year for them to get back to being 100%, but it's not as soon as we hear the word ACL and some of these other injuries, we don't think their career's over anymore. And so I just wanted to ask you, are there advancements going on right now in medicine, therapy, training, like just the way that these teams are working with these players that we think is helping them recover more quickly and helping them, honestly, just be healthier when they do return?
Yeah, honestly, across the board, I would say surgeries have improved. They've been using more biologics, stem cells, different, uh, um, basically biologics to help like preserve joints as well. They don't scrape as much. Like old surgeries used to do the ACL recon and clean up the entire knee, which led to a lot of arthritic problems and changes. Now it's all about the focus seems to be shifting towards preserving the joint, preserving the cartilage as much as possible. And I think that's been a huge role in these players being able to get back to their prior form, but also play for multiple years afterwards
Yeah,
versus like the
that I
kiss
was
of
gonna
death.
actually ask that. Do you think that what we're seeing will actually help players play longer. That, along with the
I think
rules of
so.
the game, as they continue to really try to, think more about player safety. It still drives me crazy. Quarterbacks get all the protection and running backs get hit after the play every single play. I know some of you are going to go, "Oh, you big sissy." No, my thought is, if we're going to protect the players, let's just protect all of them. Because like the running backs you see it, the whistle's already been blown. They just get thrown right onto their shoulder like 3 seconds after the whistle, and they've already given up. Like they're
Yeah.
just standing there and they just get chunked. But anyway, like that's a whole nother thing. But back to the question of, do you think that we could actually see players' careers elongated?
I think so. Yeah. Well, so it's funny you say that too about running backs. I cringe every single time a play is technically dead, but the player gets thrown backwards by like 3 defenders and landed on. But the play's already dead. So, um, yeah, I think so. It honestly plays a huge role in longevity and joint preservation, maintaining. Again, they used to just trim the meniscus a ton, just cut it out. That was the standard. Now it's all about, let's see how much we can preserve and maintain that, and that's their cushion. That's their support.
Yeah.
So that is what honestly allows these players to play a long time. And surgery has changed. It's interesting because it didn't change a ton from like the 80s, 90s to early 2000s, etc. But it seems like over the last 10 years, it's changed immensely.
Yeah.
I
A
mean, you
lot of
say that,
advancements.
yeah, and you see the same thing with technology, and so a lot of these doctors are using different machines too to make the surgeries a little bit easier or a little more precise. But again, the biologics play a big role on the rehab side too. These guys there's different tools and metrics that I don't even have access to, but these NFL teams do, in being able to truly assess. If you understood, if you've been to PT, you probably have been through it, but if you understood the process of an evaluation, and like it'd be really easy to be very vague and kind of superficial on clearing someone to go back to sport, just checking their strength, checking range of motion, etc. But if you have some of these tools that these guys have, you can look at how every single hamstring, every single muscle's activating. And like teams are using GPS. You think of LA has talked a lot about the tools that they've used. I think the GM over there, James Gladstone, has brought it to Jacksonville as well.
Even
But
your 49ers, talking about Pearsall, they wouldn't bring
yeah,
him back until he could hit certain speeds at practice.
yeah, that is a perfect example. A lot of these teams are starting to use that stuff more, which is fantastic because it prevents some of these guys from coming back too
Too
soon.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
and
it's
we're
pretty
talking
interesting.
about 2 coaches that have notoriously brought players back too early, Sean McVay and Kyle
Yep.
Shanahan. So it's
Yep.
nice to see those 2 guys
Yep.
actually embracing that technology and the science. So that really is awesome. So kind of like on that topic, like, are there coaching/training staffs, across the NFL, talking from a team level, that you trust the most or least when it comes to A, what they're talking about with injuries, and then B, just being good at their jobs and getting the players ready for action?
Yeah, so it's funny you talk about McVay and Shanahan. So it's awesome to see both of them utilize that stuff. Um, I think my guess, without knowing them, but just hearing again, Coach Speak Index has been a fantastic resource for this. Hearing how they talk about stuff, I think Sean McVay's knowledge of injuries is significantly better than Kyle Shanahan's, and I think a lot of people, we've seen it on Twitter everywhere. Everyone hates on Kyle Shanahan. The Niners aren't trustworthy with injuries. When you hear him talk about injuries, I don't think he actually knows what he's talking about, and he's likely just parroting what he's been told from medical staff. He honestly strikes me as a guy of just like, hey, you know what? You're giving me all this information. Just tell me, can the player play or not? And then
Yeah.
once he gets the clearance, like Christian McCaffrey, can Christian McCaffrey play or not? Yes. Okay, great. I'm gonna play him 90% of the snaps. I don't care. You know what I mean? But McVay has a little better. It seems like he has a better understanding of how the injury actually impacts these players, what the injury itself
He
is,
really
and
eased Puka back in. Like, he was not
yeah,
giving Puka a full-time role, after that weird injury in the end zone like 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we thought Puka might miss time. He didn't.
yeah.
But it was really a reduced role. Like, he was not out there like on a 90% route participation rate. It was like down in the 60s those
Yeah.
first couple of games.
Yeah, and the Rams have been talked about in the medical world, where because they're tied in with Cedars-Sinai, they have probably one of the better medical staffs in the NFL. So like that's a perfect example of those are the coaches that I trust a little bit more. Um, and I know we're gonna get some comments on this, but
Todd Bowles, man, come on. What about Todd Bowles? You
he's
don't got
terrible. He's on the least list. Uh,
exactly.
Least list: Harbaugh brothers, Pete Carroll, Todd Bowles. I can't listen to them talk about injuries. Um, you just don't know what you're going to get. Kyle Shanahan is one of those where honestly, aside from the Christian McCaffrey and Brandon Ayuk, they're honestly him and John Lynch. They've honestly been pretty clear on like player return, what they're hoping to get. I would say Shanahan's actually gotten better over the last year or so.
Yeah.
Um,
I think Shanahan, like, is honestly, the injury stuff has not been an issue for me with him. I
yeah,
think what you said about like what probably the way he's handling it, that's probably a very accurate description. Uh, for me, with Shanahan, really comes down to the subterfuge of like who is actually starting, what players'
yeah,
roles are. But you can totally understand, like, his whole offense is built around deception,
yeah.
and so like he's not going to give any of that information away, in a press conference. But the injury stuff hasn't bothered me too much with Shanahan. Like Todd Bowles is, the absolute worst. So let's jump into some players here, and let's talk about what you're thinking, for the rest of the season. We've got some interesting injuries that are going on. We've slightly touched on a few of those, but let's start with Jaden Daniels. Returning with the dislocated left elbow, he is going to play in Week 14. What are your expectations here with Jaden Daniels? Like on a range of, hey, they're playing him. It's a non-throwing elbow, should be good to go, or do you think there's some significant risk here?
I think the only risk here, I don't have any concerns on throwing ability. Again, like you said, non-throwing arm. It could impact mechanics a little bit. So, if anything, I would think like deep throws, throws downfield might be a little limited from an accuracy or velocity standpoint if his mechanics are different. But from a throwing standpoint, pocket passer standpoint, I don't really have concerns there. I'm more
Is it
concerned.
surprising to you that he's coming back? Because I think a lot of people saw that injury, Jeff, and it looked so gross.
Yeah,
But maybe just because the way it looks versus what's actually happening, and maybe that's something you can help people understand. Maybe I don't want to say it's not as bad. It's obviously bad, but maybe it's not as bad as people think, just based on the way it looked.
right. Yeah. So I would just say if this was his throwing elbow, he likely would have gotten Tommy John. Um, but
Mm.
because it's his non-throwing arm, he doesn't have to rely on it for throwing. So it's not necessarily surprising that I did see the reports that said, oh, there was no ligament damage, etc. I guarantee you there was some ligament damage. What they likely meant was uh, there's no ligament damage that requires surgery, meaning they're basically allowing it to scar over, and it shouldn't be an issue moving forward. My hope, what I was going to get into is my biggest concern is his play style, and as he rushes, think of like kind of similar to, oh my gosh, who was it? Was it Burrow? Or sorry, Aaron Rodgers. Like his left wrist, more so like if Jaden Daniels rushes or something, or he gets hit from behind, or he gets sacked and he puts his left arm
Just
down.
have to brace himself from a fall. Like
Yeah, yeah,
you see all these injuries from like rollerbladers and just people that do things with things under their feet that move and they
yeah,
fall.
yeah.
Yeah, the wrist injury and elbow injuries.
Yeah, that's the bracing aspect is the biggest concern. Just if it gets re-injured, then he's probably gonna get knocked out of the game. So I would anticipate him playing with a brace though. That'll help stabilize that and prevent it from dislocating or too much stress to it. But yeah, just from a throwing perspective, it looked like he had a pretty good matchup this week. So I'm not too concerned. I think I saw your model has him at 21
Yeah,
points.
the Vikings have actually been pretty good against the pass, but because he still is a dual threat quarterback, like, it just unlocks so many more paths to a ceiling game. He does have the third highest ceiling of all of the passers in the Fantasy Life projection model this week, which is based on a lot of different factors, but mainly variance, guys, and what we see from players of a caliber like Jaden Daniels. But what I did do with his projection this week is I cut his design rushing attempts in half.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I
Which I
only
like.
gave him half of those. But still, he's going to scramble, and his design rushing projections probably still higher than like 60% of quarterbacks, because a lot of them are just pocket passers. He still has those outs, if you will. And I don't have him with a super high. I think I have him projected at like 198 yards passing, and his projection, like across aggregate props, is 203. So I'm actually on the under. But again, when you think about a ceiling scenario, it's definitely there. You mentioned those Harbaugh brothers. This is a
Yeah.
Monday nighter, man.
I know.
We know all he's going to tell us is that he's playing, no matter what. All we're
Yep.
going to hear from Harbaugh is that Justin Herbert is playing. What are your thoughts on the broken left hand for Justin Herbert? How likely do you think it is to play? He is to play, and if he does play, how you feeling about it?
Yeah, I briefly saw. I should have looked at it more closely, but whoever reported it, he is expected to play. That's already been reported this morning.
Of
So
course he is. Rub some
yeah,
dirt on it.
yeah. What
Him
I
and Dan
don't,
Campbell, man, rub some dirt on it. Get out
yeah.
there.
But again, honestly, very similar to Aaron Rodgers, where Rodgers did miss a week, but really the main concern is taking snaps. We saw some video of him taking snaps under center. I'll honestly be a little surprised if I would anticipate they go a little more shotgun pistol where he doesn't have to take snaps under center,
Yeah.
because just fumbling would be more of a concern. Again, same thing as Jaden. I hope they're working on like tucking, rolling, just as a reactionary, like have him get hit a couple times and just work on keeping his hand in versus landing with his wrist out like that, where it just puts too much stress on the repair
Right.
site where they fix the fracture. But honestly, aside from that, I'm going to be completely honest, he should be fine. What I don't know is they've been working on red zone offense with Trey Lance and like those short yardage goal line situations with Trey Lance. Some of those like quarterback sneaks where he would take it under center.
You could
So I
kind of get
don't.
some of the Taysom Hill touches.
Yeah, exactly. So I
Yeah.
would anticipate if that happens, his ceiling's a little lower this week. But just from a passing standpoint, I'm not concerned.
Yeah, I'm pretty low on Herbert I'm not super low. I mean, he still projects as the QB 11. As
Is
far as like
Philly
his
though?
ceiling, goes. If you look at his median projection, he comes in as the QB 12, but it's just like I'm not gonna mess with it. Like, I'm gonna start Brissett over him.
Yeah,
Obviously, you're starting Joe Burrow over him. You might even, if you had Jared Goff, hopefully you started Jared Goff over him. Like for some of these folks that are carrying the two quarterbacks, if you're not, he still is in a range where he's definitely, he's startable. So like, I think you could still play him, but I'm not crazy about it this week. Talking about another throwing arm injury, Baker Mayfield, he's still dealing with this non-throwing shoulder AC joint. And honestly, like Baker, man, we talked about Emeka Egbuka earlier, like in the hamstring injury that he had. I've kind of wondered if there's something else going on with Baker even before this injury that we didn't know about, because really the accuracy has fallen off over the second half of the year. And it hasn't mattered really which receiver, any receiver that's not like with a short average depth of target, like the catch rates and the catchable target rates are down. Any thoughts here on Baker?
yeah. I was talking to Scott Barrett about this because he actually asked something similar a couple weeks ago. He's been dealing with an oblique injury for quite a while. I think since maybe week 6, week 7. I'd have to look back at it. But I mean, the oblique is really important, and especially as a passer,
Your
just his
core.
rotation. Yeah.
Yep.
Velocity, accuracy. So like all the things, again, it takes, you can't, it's hard to prove, but on paper it makes sense. Like all the areas where he's regressed, it makes sense that, well, maybe he is a little more limited with this oblique injury. Baker's one of those guys though, like him, Matt Stafford. He's one of those guys where it's like, would it really shock you after the season if you heard he's playing through rib fractures or,
No.
it's like he could be dealing with
Yeah.
anything right now. But I do believe that oblique injury, I think he only popped up 1 week on the injury report with the oblique, and he was a full participation. That is one
And
thing.
he's also one of these players that is just like that. Like he's not
Right.
he's gonna just push through it. He's not gonna miss practice reps, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So even
I've
though he
had
gets listed as a full participant, doesn't mean that it's not impacting him.
exactly. Yeah, I had a great conversation with Derek Brown, D-Bro. Like these guys, even if they're listed as full participants, it just means that they're getting full reps. They're doing everything in practice. Doesn't mean they're fully healthy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, at this stage, they're all probably like
It's full
80 to 90.
participation. That's all it
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
Participation just means they're out there. It doesn't mean that they're not having to work at 80% or something like that. It doesn't mean they're 100%. That's a really good call out. So real quick on the quarterbacks in summary, I'm putting you on the spot here, but this is
Mm.
rest of season because people are thinking about their fantasy playoffs. Jaden Daniels, I'm going to have him as a mid-range QB1 the rest of the way. How about you?
Yeah, I'm fine with that, especially with his rushing upside.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Justin Herbert, I also think is a mid-range QB1 the rest of the way. A little more worried about him this week, but I think and in the weeks after, things get better. My bigger concern, honestly, with Justin Herbert is how the offensive line is played, and they're having to change really and use more multi-tight end sets and stuff like that, and they're not throwing the ball as much as they were early in the year. But I'm thinking mid-range to low end, probably QB1 on Herbert. How about you?
Yeah, when you said that, my very first thought was I'm not as concerned about Herbert himself as much as like looking at the splits on and off with especially with like Joe Alt, but especially
Yeah.
entire O line. I wouldn't be surprised if he's like a low end quarterback one, high end quarterback two versus. I mean, when his O line was healthy, he was top 5, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I do think that there's a world where Justin Herbert's just a high end QB2 the rest of the way because they're forced to play different.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure if that's going to happen, but it's definitely in the range of outcomes. Baker Mayfield, I think at this point with him, honestly, I just think he's a low end QB1, high end QB2. Could he surprise us and start looking better? Yes. He's also probably going to get Mike Evans back. It's
Yep.
not happening this week, but maybe the following week. We should have Chris Godwin continuing to get healthier from the fibula. Theoretically, we should also have Emeka Egbuka. Like every week, he's a week further away. And you tell me if I'm wrong on this from that hamstring injury that he suffered, where he didn't miss time. Technically, even though I'm saying is a low end QB1, he might have a little more ceiling than Herbert because I feel like there is a path to his guys all getting healthy and then being able to run the offense they want.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Tristan Wirf's injured this week too, so that's one to watch.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with that. Especially, I think Mike Evans does return next week. Chris Godwin's snaps have steadily increased. I'm watching that one closely though because hairline fracture in his fibula,
Yeah.
same side that he had the surgery on. But again, this offense is getting healthier. One too that's actually
And
not on the list.
Bucky's back. So
Bucky back, yeah. Which he's not just a running back. He is very good and strong in the passing game. So
Yep.
that'll help Baker. Lamar Jackson. I know a lot of people are panicking.
Oh
him.
yeah. Hit on that.
I honestly think it's hard because every week he plays without more recovery, he's going to have a little bit higher risk. And like we're dealing with, he's a great example of the compensatory injuries. It's just steadily worked down the chain. But at some point, he's such a hard guy to bench because at some point he's going to pop off. He's going to bounce back. It's just
so where would you put him rest of season? Because this week in the ranks, I finally did move him down. I had been just basically being like what you had said. He's still Lamar. Look, he's gonna get it going, and I had him in the top 4 or 5 this week. I think I've got him at QB8. The projections also are now docking him because the way they work is once I have so many data points, it leans into the some of the more recent games get weighted in a little bit. And so he's also projecting for less. But if you had to make a call based on what you're seeing with him, mid-range QB1, or you think, no, he'll end up being a high-end QB1 the way that folks drafted him?
Yeah, I don't know. I think when I was looking at his schedule and everything and just thinking through time frame of injury, I was thinking week 16, 17. I wouldn't be surprised if he's back up there. For now, probably mid to low end with a little bit more risk of putting up these 10-point games.
Yeah, yeah, and you just never would have thought that, like, that's the risk with Lamar,
Yeah.
like, the floor was, like, 15 to 16, that's a
Yeah.
terrible game from Lamar. Okay, so Amari Hampton coming back from this ankle fracture, sounding like he's probably gonna play, this weekend. You know, Kamani Vidal has also played well, but this is one of those injuries that we talked about where the players had a long time, you know, to get ready to come back. But it's a lower body injury that
Mhm.
probably impacted their training. You've also had some specific comments about Omari and Hampton over on Twitter or on X that I've been following along about, you know, how, you know, his lower body looks. So why don't you elaborate on Hampton and what your expectations are the rest of the way for him?
It's pixelated, but if you zoom in, his left ankle does look bigger. So it's. I have a theory he may have gotten surgery, but I can't prove it, and we're probably never going to hear about that from Harbaugh because he's terrible. Um, but yeah, I'm really curious. I have no idea, honestly, how to project Amari and Hampton because you know, he was still in a non-contact jersey on Wednesday. He got out of it yesterday. He was out of it, or sorry, he got out of it Thursday, and then Friday he was in a blue jersey. Um, so it sounds like he is going to play. He got full participation in multiple variables. Hasn't played in a long time. Conditioning. I think he's been doing a lot outside of practice, which is good. But again, he hasn't played behind this battered O line in weeks, a long time. The one good thing on the opposite end for Philly is that Jalen Carter is out after having surgery on both of his shoulders, so that should help the run game for the Chargers.
Yeah,
And
that's
I
a
would
huge loss for
anticipate,
Philly.
yeah, I would anticipate the Chargers leaning a little bit more on the run as long as the game script's not getting out of hand because of Herbert's hand.
But is
hand.
this one where you would expect Hampton to probably ramp up as we go? We don't really know what to expect this
Yeah,
week. Honestly, like I've got Hampton with a slight edge, but it wouldn't surprise me if Kamani Vidal actually handled more of the work this week. I think that's in the range of outcomes. It's hard to get overconfident one way or another, but would you anticipate that like as the weeks go on and he gets healthier, see him have a chance to be like a 60, 65%, you know, snap share kind of guy?
yeah, yeah. Sorry, I was slowly getting there.
Oh no, it's okay. Sorry.
It's okay. I ramble sometimes. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I wouldn't, especially because the staff, Vidal has played very well. The staff keeps talking him up. It sounds like
Well, we
everything.
also see that stuff mean absolutely nothing at
Yeah,
times. Like we get the talk up of the player and it means, and then all of a sudden they get 5% of the work. Like that happens so much. Like,
Sean
I mean,
Tucker.
and I do love the coach speak index and looking through those sort of things, but at the same time, like it's still a tough. It's tough to read between the tea leaves on these coaches. So what about? I know we can hit this really quickly, but we you mentioned it a little bit earlier. But Trey Benson with this meniscus surgery that he had, it really feels like he's got until next week to be
Yeah,
activated with his 21-day window. Like if I had to say right now, I'm no doctor like you, Jeff, but I'm pretty pessimistic right now on Trey Benson. A lot of people playing in these high stakes or mid stakes tournaments, fantasy, like over at Real Time Sports and the Fantasy Life Championship. Like today's the last day to make moves on waiver wires, and you got a guy like Trey Benson. Are you even keeping him?
yeah. I can't say this with certainty, but I'm a little skeptical that he's going to play again this year. I think they're going to wind up leaving him on IR. I don't know if he had a setback on that Thursday. He went from limited
Yeah,
participant
it seems like
to,
he did,
yeah.
but
Oh,
we don't know.
well, setback versus what I don't know, and they Jonathan Gannon, he's actually on the least list too. He didn't really give great info, but I don't know if it was a setback versus just he's not ready. Again, these it's so easy to view those meniscus surgeries as simple, like a simple
Yeah,
debridement, simple cleanup, but sometimes they scrape. And like you think of Jerick McKinnon years ago with the Niners, or Javon Kinlaw, or you see it in basketball too, where these guys get surgery and the cartilage just remains flared up and they can't return to some of that activity. And I saw some videos when he first got back to practice. He does not look good. So I don't know. I would honestly, I know this is risky, but I would honestly be fine dropping Trey Benson
yeah,
because even if he does get activated, I could see them activate him so that he's at least available, but he might not even still return, just so he's not out for the whole year. But once he's back playing, I don't think he's going to get that role back. at 100%. He'll be eased in. And I think one of the signs, they brought in a couple other running backs as well. So I think they're leaning towards leaving him on
Yeah.
IR and just
Honestly,
aiming for
they should just shut him
2026.
down. They
Yeah.
suck. They're not winning games. They should
Yeah.
just like let the young player get healthy. But I'm with you. I think it's okay if you guys need to drop him, you can. We already hit on Romo Dunze earlier with the stress fracture, but obviously we know now like we're looking at a multi-week timeline here, guys. So that
Yeah.
could be for all of your fantasy playoffs. So like I would say super quick here on this one though, Jeff. Like, is Romo Dunze droppable, or like if you don't have an IR spot?
So he's missing week 14. I honestly could see him missing anywhere from 3 to 5 weeks. So that's basically could be
And
basically
then it's
all
not going to
playoffs.
magically heal and be ready. He's going to be playing through it.
Yeah.
And it's stress. He could be at risk of re-injury again. I'm with you. Romo Dunze's massive downgrade for me in the rest of season projections. They also have other capable players
Yeah.
that can take the load. Drake London, PCL, we did briefly hit on him earlier. Do you see the Falcons obviously struggling right now, but they are in a division where they're not technically eliminated, in the NFC South. Do you think we see Drake London return this year, and will it be the version that honestly he had turned into a superstar? Do we see that version again?
Yeah, honestly, I again these PCL injuries have been difficult to project. We saw it with Ricky Pearsall. It very well could wind up being a Pearsall situation where he misses. He's expected to miss 1 or 2 weeks, and he misses 4 or 5 weeks. I think his first couple games back, he'll be limited. So that does impact. Even if he's back next week, that's week 15. He's probably going to be limited week 16, 17 as well.
Okay.
So I wouldn't expect
Not in the
pre-injury.
cut category, guys. Like Odunze is a potential cut for me, depending
Yeah.
on the size of league you're in. Like if you're in a 14-team league, obviously you're not cutting Odunze. There's nothing there to pick up. But like some of you guys play in 18 leagues, things like that, you might be looking at an AD Mitchell or something. Like I honestly, I think it's a borderline call between AD Mitchell the rest of the way versus Romo Dunze. All right, so Mike Evans, that's an upper body injury. Should be in great shape. Broken clavicle. So basically, like once the bone's healed, like you should be ready to go. Correct?
Correct. Yeah, once he's back, I expect to see normal Mike Evans. On these
Okay.
clavicle fractures, I don't really dip. I don't have them in regression much.
Okay, great. Yeah, so it's not one when they come back you're really worried about a reduction in production. Okay.
Only thing would be the Baker
Yeah,
issue.
the Baker issue, which they did not have the connection early this year either, guys. It's been a rough year for Mike Evans all around. Garrett Wilson, eligible to return next week from the knee injury. Any quick expectations there?
I have heard nothing on Garrett Wilson. I actually have him in a couple leagues. I still don't know. I've been checking every week. I have no idea if he's going to return this year or not. And that does play a big role in AD Mitchell's production too, because
Yep.
we're seeing these guys get bumped up with Tyrod at quarterback, and the pass scheme has actually been pretty good. But unfortunately, he's one that I just don't have any good read on if he's going to play again or not. I know Aaron Glenn said a couple weeks ago that we do expect him to play again, but things change as the season goes. The teams lose.
Yeah, and the coach is going to say that, guys, but the
Right.
general manager also gets a say.
Yeah.
And, the general manager is the one that's honestly more likely to think ahead, to next year. Coaches, they're in the trenches. They're in the battle, man. They're trying to just win, down to down, week to week. Whereas the GM, may have a different perspective on Garrett Wilson, who they just paid. And getting him back out there. For what it's worth, guys, I do believe that AD Mitchell will keep his role when Garrett Wilson returns. He will continue to start on the outside. John Mechie would then kick inside to the slot. So in 3 wide receiver sets, Mechie would still be out there. But I think Mechie is the one that gets hurt the most when Garrett Wilson returns, because he's been playing the Z, which is really where Garrett Wilson is playing more over the last 2 years. And they would let AD Mitchell play the X, which is exactly, Aaron Glenn said that's why they wanted to get him. It wasn't a throw in the deal. They wanted an X vertical boundary receiver that could beat man coverage. And, AD Mitchell is as inconsistent as he can be at times. He has shown an ability to do that. So one final one, Jaden Reed, Jones fracture and clavicle, 21-day practice window's been open, I believe 2 weeks now. He could return this week. What do you think rest of season for Reed? Obviously, we know he'll just play the slot and they'll drive us crazy and never give him a full route participation. But do you expect him to be performing at 100%?
Honestly, yeah, I expect him to be probably not 100%, but pretty close, even if 90%. But I think he's going to fill that role like we saw with Tucker Kraft across the middle, get the ball into his hands, get yak. I think Jaden Reed is going to fill a very important role for this offense that they've missed over the last since Kraft got injured. So he would be a guy that I'd be very interested in trying to acquire right now. Just in the off chance that he starts producing really well for these last couple weeks.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I do think that Reed comes in and becomes like the yak, and we've seen him do it before. But Jaden Reed's a really good player. The only thing that hurts him is his limitation in playing time. But I've got him in the rest of season projections as a wide receiver 4 with upside. But he could be a guy that gets on a hot streak, even in a part-time role, guys, that gives you more like a wide receiver 2 production. So really good stuff, Jeff, man. I appreciate you coming on, running through all these players and, just talking through, your process, all those things. Tell people where they can find all of your work.
Yeah, I on Twitter or X, especially on game days, I like to post some updates, video injury analysis on Twitter X at JMThrivePT. I write articles for 4for4 and weekly articles there, and then DLF. I write some articles every 3 weeks or so, a series, and then Injury Pod every Saturday night drops Destination Devi on Spotify.
Nice. Well, appreciate you being on,
Yeah.
man, and we will look to get you back on in the future. And for everybody else, we will talk data to you again next week. See you then.